you, Paul, for the invitation to come and speak. It's going to be, there's going to be a couple of points where we're going to pause through the presentation to have hopefully a very short discussion or approach any questions. But really, to get in front of you folks is something I've been wanting to do for a little while, so this has worked out really well. Hands up, how many people are here just because of the title? There we go. True. The background on this is I was at a conference and that was a title for a talk, and I said I just got to go to see what it is. So no, we're not going to teach you the secret to successful CPR, but if you want to get people to come to your seminar at a conference, steal that title, because that's how I did it. Anyway, thank you for the invitation. So off we go. So we are going to have 3 distinct phases or stops today. Really, I want to talk about, I know it's not all about me, but it's kind of all about me. I want to talk about my own journey, lived experience. I've got almost 30 years in as a paramedic, and it really affected me. And it affected the direction of my latter part of my career, my PhD, and the focus of my PhD and post-PhD. So I think that might color it in a little bit. I understand there might even be one paramedic listening in today, hopefully, and hopefully you can hear me. I wanted to do an overview of some of the findings of my recently completed PhD, because I recently completed a PhD. It's about the context of paramedic work, and I don't think we've ever adequately described what happens when a paramedic goes to work for a period of time and gets calls, and what happens during the calls. So we've mapped that out. And finally, I want to at least start the discussion, I can't lead it, on the kind of what I hope to be the psychophysiologic responses that we might be able to study in. I know we talked about first responders, but I kind of stay around the paramedic area, but how we can marry the psychological measures and instruments and all the great evidence that's there with some of the physiologic responses now with something like the astroskin, which is here in the conference room, to see if we're getting a more complete picture. So how's that? Okay. So far, so good. All right. So I'm also going to make sure that there's pictures of ambulances, pictures of beautiful places, at least one graph, and there are only 36 slides. So if those are not for the ones in the room, but if you're at home and you want to open a second browser and answer emails, you can come back in at slide 35. Okay. Paul has never seen me present before. As you can tell from my accent, I'm from Canada, and this is a shot of where I grew up, and that's Prince Edward Island. It's very small, and that's the actual size. So from space, did my initial paramedic training, but I started out there as a firefighter, actually. Prince Edward Island is renowned for being beautiful in the summertime, and summertime in Prince Edward Island is July the 8th, and the rest of the time there's about 10 feet of snow. So much for the travel log. This is where I started out in EMS and have had a great career. I started as a firefighter in 1990. And 2 years later, that should be, there we go. 2 years later, I went to paramedic school, and believe it or not, I'm in the middle there beside my kids, and my preceptor is holding my then youngest son. The little boy to my right is now 36 years old. So, and quite a bit bigger than me. So I started as a paramedic because it seemed like an exciting thrill a minute. And I had a really good career. In fact, spent some time, 6 years in Ottawa, as a critical care flight paramedic, and did the trip up to Pembroke an awful lot. It was Pembroke back to Ottawa was always the dispatch information. Kept up my career in firefighting until just recently when I left Bathurst, New South Wales. So 23 years all up, in a number of suburban and rural spots, and came to Australia in 2013. The promise was I could teach paramedics at the university level, which is unheard of in the world. You have such a good system here. England and South Africa emulate it, and to do a PhD. And I don't know why they said I could do a PhD, but I just nodded my head and said, let's go. These days, I work event medicine almost primarily. This is a stadium motocross. If you ever want trauma skill practice, this is where you want to go, and with earmuffs. And I also work part-time as an on-set paramedic at a television show that is filmed not too far from here. So I continue to be active as a paramedic, although not so much as the state-based service. I think that's probably enough about me. However, I have to admit to the group that's online and the group that's here that the journey that started 30 years ago has had a lot of ups and downs, and I mean physically, mentally, and psychologically has taken a toll on me. This is a picture of 417 at Limoges. February 2006. That's a 38-car pileup, and that's me. I'm just coming back from doing a media conference. I was deputy chief of the Ottawa Paramedic Service. We're just about to start body removal. So it has been its ups and downs. It has a good ending though, Paula. You know, understanding that I had periods of what I would consider unwellness, but couldn't quantify it, couldn't qualify it, probably looked after it in all the wrong ways, has got me into this room today, which is where I want to be. So my own PhD research journey is about paramedic health status. I thought if I'm in, let's say, the last third of my career, I hope, I can make a positive contribution in the research arena, teaching arena, and with some good collaborations, maybe make them a little bit healthier than they are now, because some of them aren't very healthy. So far, so good. The picture on the left is 3 paramedics from Prince Edward Island, Canada, and the guy in the middle retired. Now, this is all 3 great guys, but we sat around and we tried to figure out who the last paramedic we knew actually made it to retirement. And the last one before the guy in the middle was 20 years before that. We were all leaving before the end. Anecdotal. However, the Ottawa Sun article that's on the right talks about the strain, and I think some of you have actually investigated strain in first responders, perhaps in paramedics, certainly police, dispatch. Great work. It's hard to quantify how far paramedics are getting into the profession, because no one's really reporting them and services aren't really giving it up. But just know that a lot of the ones I started with aren't in the business anymore. To have a singular career as a paramedic where you still have the title paramedic at the end is not as common as you think. In Australia, they don't report longevity, they do report turnover, and it ranges at state and territory services, according to the report on government services, between 2.5% to 17%, depending on service, but kind of nothing on length. And my saying is you should be a paramedic for as long as you want to be a paramedic. We are on call 24/7. You probably know all this. If you want to see some of the things we do, there's a couple of television shows which I really don't like, but they'll show you kind of some of the things we'll do. Endemic to our profession, and this is kind of nationally and internationally, is we have really high injury and illness rates. 7 times the national average in Australia compared to the next occupation in 2014 study that Brian Maguire's. In Victoria, paramedics are 13 times more likely to be injured than their next level down occupation, which is nursing. Comp claims, what employers would pay to insurance schemes and in covering of paramedics, are probably, I always estimate, in the top 3 budget items of any ambulance service. So internationally, it follows that same trend. So is the work making them sick? Is there something else affecting them? I went through my own personal journey and I thought probably a bit of both. So I thought we should take a look at it. Okay, how's the pace?
Very good.
Perfect. There's a quiz at the end, but it's for CPD. Some of the seminal work in terms of the health of paramedics was started with this gentleman. His name is Colin Borman. He's an Irish researcher. And in the early 90s, he had the foresight to look at paramedic services, the ambulance men of Belfast Ambulance Service. And he said, all right, what do you do for a living? And he went out and quantified it. And that was probably one of the first ones. And he did quite a good job. He's an exercise physiologist. Then they did an exercise intervention, saw some great improvements. And then they said, well, let's have a look at the health status. And as the paramedics, and you can imagine the crew room in Belfast, they put their cigarettes out, climb on the scales, and some of the cruder measures, and I'm allowed to speak that way because I was there, was it kicked us off, meaning in terms of this is the beginning of our research. And I won't claim any credit for that yet, but some of the stuff that has happened since then is that you folks would know this in your field, that there's great research going on stress, burnout, and anxiety. We've just spoken about sick time and injuries, and they are out of control. Health status markers, and especially the prevalence of cardiovascular disease, and I'll speak specifically of prehypertension and hypertension in not only all first responders, but in particular paramedics. We don't know what paramedics do quantification-wise, and that was kind of the gist of my PhD. And we don't know if we test them on the right way going in to say, can you lift a heavy person off the floor? And is that valid? So lots of areas for us to get involved with, but that's just a quick scan of the literature, just to say that there's things happening. There's been great research in Australia as well, and some at Better Griffith. So, excuse me. Now, I'm going to say there's an unconscious patient in this video. I wanted to show you what the context of our work. If you don't wish to watch it, I'll tell you when it's done. You'll see the patient only peripherally, but I wanted to show you the paramedic's physiologic reaction to being a paramedic. So I'll pause for a moment. Is everybody okay with that? Probably nothing worse than you wouldn't see on any episode of, I don't know, whatever's big.
Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah, Grey's Anatomy. So, yeah. Let's see if I can get this thing started. Yeah. So one of the things that we need to understand right away is ambulances aren't ergonomically designed. I like the, I just want to see if I can advance this. So these are, sorry.
Are you trying to move forward?
I don't want to show you the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay, so you just want to pause it for a bit?
No, just want to, oh, I can do it there.
This is the one that's online.
That's perfect.
So that pauses that one, but to pause that one, you have to click it on there.
Yeah, watch him grab a heavy defibrillator. They're going for an unconscious patient, jumping out of the truck and running. This is probably a young, relatively fit one. Now, as soon as he gets there, he has to do a dexterous skill. It takes a lot of bandwidth starting an IV on a patient who's got very low, if any, blood pressure. In the background, you see CPR going on. And so although this represents 2% of our call volume, these are the sickest of the sick patients that we deal with. So is there any way I can move that forward? Can you move it forward?
If I do, it'll only be for the online people. To move it forward, it has to be something on here. Oh, you can pause. Oh, right there. See that little arrow? Looks like you can move forward. Oh, no, restart.
No. I can't move it forward.
Sorry.
I'll ask that those that are watching online and are here, you can see that I'm assuming it's a he, has to control heart rate, breathing, use of anatomy to try and find that vein, and at the same time be part of that crew effort. And the signal, I call it the signal to noise ratio, which is everything that's going around this patient is paramedic is distracting him. So this is starting infusion, starting to give drugs. So although it may appear a little bit chaotic, this is kind of a job you could expect to go to as a paramedic, although not frequently. Now, I'd like to be able to move it forward if I could. I'm not sure how.
Can you just try pressing that? I just want to see if that
just restarts my timer.
Okay, sorry.
So there's a defibrillation going on at the same time. And I think really the point I wanted to get across here is while we call the job physically demanding, well, we do, really, it is comprised of infrequent, awkward lifting, turning, moving, and carrying. And that has an influence on the musculoskeletal injury rate. And the other part of it that I don't think is talked about enough is how does the physiologic response of that paramedic influence his health, I'm assuming it's a him, over the short and long term, because there's many markers of illness going on. So it started again. So the take-home message is, and by the way, they saved the patient, he came back to life. And this is very indicative of what paramedics may do. So I'm right on time. I have 3 pause points. Catch your breath. You can look back if you're looking away. If you're answering emails, it's time to come back to the conversation. For those online or in person for the seminar, what questions or comments might you have so far for me? And Paula has cleverly designed a contract where I get paid by the question, and I need to buy milk on the way home. What do you think? What do you reckon? I love that word. Yeah, very clever, Paula.
I think, yeah, the one thing that stands out for me is the uncertainty they've got to deal with on a day-to-day basis, that when you get called out, you probably get some inkling of what's going to happen, but you don't understand the full context and what's going on until you're actually there.
That's right.
The other thing was that guy putting in the IV, or woman putting in the IV. I've had a few IVs over my life, and I've had nurses in a really controlled condition, well experienced, who can't, or who make a mistake on the. So to do it under that sort of pressure is just bloody remarkable.
Yeah. So maybe this will serve as just a bit of an introduction to how I got to this point, a little bit about what we do. And not every call is like that, although I've started an IV on a patient, the only part I could get at was this part of his hand. That's the only part that wasn't trapped. So, got it.
Wow.
But that gives you an idea of why I think physiologic monitoring, in addition to psychological reporting, is really important in our research for paramedics and first responders and others. Okay, so this is the end of stop one. Any other comments or questions? Anything coming in online? Yeah.
Nothing online yet. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, well, two things. This is very familiar to me. Not that I've been a paramedic, but you should have trigger warning. Now, I used to be a chef, and when I got out of that trade, I felt like I had what I call post-kitchen traumatic stress disorder for 20 years. And I really relate to what's being shown here. Not that I had to do work, anything like that, but the uncertainty factor. You know, you don't know what you're going to encounter in a given service. That's the most stressful time in the kitchen. So it's very familiar to me what you're leading towards. So my question was, you know, was that a factor? I guess we're going to find out in your research, the influence of uncertainty on the physiology, on the stress levels, etc.
Yeah,
Is that a thing?
Yeah. Yeah, and we won't be able to share it all today, but I'll show you where you can find kind of the summary. But yes, and one of the things we took away from the PhD was the older that you got as a paramedic, the cooler you got as a paramedic, and no matter what the call was, the physiologic shift was always less.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
except if you were unwell, meaning hypertensive,
yes.
obese.
Yes,
Yeah.
you could do an equal study in the hospitality industry
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. So yes,
Not many old chefs.
good insight. Any other questions or comments before we push off for the stage 2? I like this way.
Is that enough for milk?
It's a couple of dollars.
Almost. We have another stop up ahead. So let's push on. So we'll switch gears now. You kind of know the background, a little bit of context. So the research itself that I took on, it prompted 2 questions for me. They said you can do whatever you want. And in the end, I settled on 2 questions. Does being a paramedic affect your health status? And I chose to look at measures of self-report with the New South Wales ambulance population. That was part of my PhD. And does health status affect being a paramedic? And we wanted to do that through physiologic monitoring. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, that's a Schrodinger's cat question, you are right. So I thought it was quite clever to put it that way. It took 6 years, and the title is Fit for Duty, Context and Correlates of Paramedic Health Status and Job Performance. As you all know, only 3 people read your PhD: your spouse, your examiner, and hopefully your supervisor. So I put the URL in there if you want to have a look at it, because there's only 3 downloads so far. I'm kidding. So let's jump in. This is kind of a précis of some of the ways that I think the technologies ultimately can work across disciplines in studying the health of first responders. So we wanted to understand the context. We wanted to watch paramedics and compare physiologic responses by about 10 variables, but call type and measure of health status were 2 of the biggest ones. We enrolled 32 paramedics across the state from New South Wales Ambulance. And by the way, New South Wales Ambulance, when I cold called them and said I'd really like to study the healthy population, said yes, come in. And I didn't understand that answer, but I got to know it. They had tried to do a health analysis of their paramedic population the year before, and it was kiboshed by probably the union. So we went in and enrolled 32 across and monitored them over a 6-month period. We used the Hexoskin biometric shirt, which is the cousin to the one that's on the table here. We were looking at all the physiologic measures, including BP. We looked at a self-report of perceived exertion, but New South Wales Ambulance gave me every single bit of call data that they generated. That was almost 1,000 calls over that 6-month period. And we were able to break them down into even sections of calls so we knew exactly when they were with the patient and when they weren't. And that we were able to combine them in one program called VivoSense, the physiologic and the call details, and we merged them. When we say we, it was me. So we looked at a lot of variables. There are too many to list here, but age, gender, where they worked, level of certification, did they drive to the call? Darren might be interested in that one. A couple of measures of health status, how physically active, how many patients were they transporting, but physiologically we were looking at, for the big one for me was not variability, it was heart rate difference from shift start, maximal and minimal. Same with respiratory rate, RPE, G-force production. These suits come with tracks, accelerometers that sum the 3 vectors and take the pull of Earth's gravity and give you a number, like If you're going on the top of a roller coaster, you pull the G-force. This does it too. Energy burn and aerobic capacity, which I did in a separate study. And we are, yes?
So just look at recovery back to baseline, like a heart.
Yes, we did.
You do.
Yeah, wait till you see.
That's really interesting.
That's the graph. Spoiler alert.
Oh, good.
But you're right. You're exactly right. And it was profoundly influenced by health status. Yeah. So what it looked like, and by the way, this is about 2015, 2016, I was collecting all this data and I said, what am I doing? Anyway, I had a team of 4 supervisors who were excellent, including one who was an exercise physiologist, and he kept me on track. So what it looked like with the screen looks like a busy screen. It makes me look important, but this is one ambulance call out of the almost 1,000 that we looked at. Each ambulance call has 5 distinct sections or pieces to it, periods of time. And what we talk about is when they drop the call, and that's here, and that's a period of time from when your pager goes off till the door slams in the ambulance and you're en route, to the drive to the patient's side, to all the time that you spend with the patient, to the trip back to the hospital. Let's see if I can do this, back to the hospital, and finally the disposition at the hospital when you're supposedly coming back to baseline. So the graph is, in this particular one, the parameters I was looking at were tidal volume, obviously the paramedics' tidal volume, G-force production, minute ventilation, heart rate, and a raw ECG feed. And we would export that to a spreadsheet. And now that we had all the timestamps, I can compare, I call these epochs, I can compare physiologic changes within every single ambulance call, which is what it did. So here's the graph. A bit busy, but along the x-axis, it's increasing BMI. Okay, out of the 32 participants. Along the y-axis, it is the change in heart rate from shift start, which is represented by the red line. So there was significant differences. That's the line of regression, obviously, with the 95% confidence interval. But in each of those epochs, and it goes assign, en route, on scene, to hospital, and at hospital, those who had a higher BMI had well, obviously never came back down to baseline, their own baseline. So they were, and so that last one worries me. So it worried me so much I put an arrow beside it. So they're sitting in a crew room somewhere with a much elevated heart rate, not coming back down. And that is a function of, I think, BMI is a very crude tool, as was pointed out to me along the way, but when you combine it with other measures like waist to height ratio, you're starting to get at least a bit of a picture of health status, among other things. So we found lots and lots of these things. We found it was the same thing for respiratory rate. We took a group of them and said, we're gonna establish your highest heart rate. We're gonna do your heart rate max, and we're going to establish your level of cardiorespiratory fitness as expressed by VO2 max. So 14 of them volunteered. I used the multi-stage shuttle test, which, if you remember, in gym class was pretty hateful. In fact, I had one who ran down to one end of the gym and didn't come back, to a gazelle who was probably still running. So I was interested. I'm starting to think, all right, we got health status, but it's not physical strength so much, because they're all reasonably strong, but what other measures have not been looked at? And this has not been looked at. So we found something really interesting. So we classified the VO2 max results by industry standards of poor, fair, average, good, and excellent. There was no one in the excellent category. This is a measure of its mean and 95% confidence interval of your heart rate reserve. So that's representing how hard or how much of your actual percentage of the fastest your heart will go you're using. So those that had really poor fitness were using way more. Okay, almost 55% of their heart rate max on every single call. This is a routine transfer, this is a lift assist, this is a standby. The mixture was 500 calls. Here's the fittest people that we had. They're down around low 40s. So when we talk about bandwidth and as our heart rate goes up, we tend to lose some of that kind of fine motor skill, cognitive thinking. It has to be much higher than this, but I'm just showing these people do the same job. They might be sitting beside each other in the same station. So that's the second kind of big finding that I thought was really interesting.
Was there a correlation between age and fitness at all? So older?
The older paramedics that we had enrolled were relatively fit from a cardiorespiratory point of view, waist to height, BMI.
Yeah. They probably wouldn't stay in there if they weren't. Yeah.
They had the secret to success.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the end, we put forward a thesis that we talked about the context. This is what you do and this is what you can expect to do over a block of shifts, and we threw it out to the world. But what we found was we kept getting hits. We put all of those variables in a blender and put them on high, and it spit out the explanatory variables of BMI. Was very important. Aerobic capacity, age, you're right, the older you got, the cooler you got. Epoch, when you first got the call, there was a significant jump in heart rate response, BP, and respiratory rate, and when you first meet the patient. So those 2 periods.
Is that dependent on the type of call, or is it general across all calls?
Across all calls. Yeah.
So even if you were
Yeah.
going out to rescue a cat of the country
Yeah.
or something, you still...
Yeah. Posting rural paramedics, rural regional paramedics, which represent half the workforce in New South Wales Ambulance, had a higher physiologic shift to all calls, and they were also had a higher BMI than their metro counterparts. And we explored kind of some of the reasoning why that might be in the first part of the. You got to get that download, right? At least read the abstract. What's important, though, is when we presented it to New South Wales Ambulance senior managers, all 100 of them, all of this data, we brought to their attention, really, there's a scarcity of validated physical employment standards. We don't know if we're bringing in the right types of people, even psychological employment standards, for them to withstand what might be a career that lasts between 1 and 40 years. So we threw that one out there as a talking point. New South Wales Ambulance took us up on a lot of the data that we presented, and instituted a workplace wellness workshop for all 4,000 of their employees. So my data is in day 2, and they're just finishing the last third. And we've since gone on, they've introduced gyms into the workplace. They've installed 243 gyms, in which we're currently researching and looking for a psychologist for that. We're at a pause point. So for those online or in person, what questions or comments might you have? The milk jug is a reminder.
Is there, you know how with firefighters, there's usually fitness training to get the job? They're the same for paramedics? Okay, that's what I was wondering.
No, it's I call it a dog's breakfast. Some it's minimal, some it's, especially when you get to special teams, it's quite hard and exhaustive.
I was thinking the same thing, because firefighters I know are
Yeah.
super fit and they've all got gyms at their
Yeah.
stations and stuff like that. So I'm really surprised that paramedics
Mm.
and those don't. And then I was thinking of the police, the stereotype of the big fat police.
They-
No,
they-
awful, I'm stereotyping.
But they have
But there's a
fitness.
massive
We're right on
issue.
time.
Hopefully we've got no police online.
They have fitness requirements at the beginning.
Yeah,
for-
yeah, exactly.
Oh,
So-
and there's,
Oh,
yeah,
And
and there's
they're
initial.
not that, I don't know how hard they are, but I was wondering how, what are the requirements then? If you said there's no psych testing and no physiological.
I shouldn't say, I'll qualify that. I'll say there's none, certainly there's no national standard, there's no international body to say this is what we should be doing. Ben Meadley, a researcher out of Victoria, is working on the PES side of things. You know, what do we need to do? But once you're in, there's no retraining, or sorry, there's no fitness requirement unless you're going specialty teams or you're coming back from injury. We need these data to show what we do, and then we need to say, well, what's it take to do this from a cardiorespiratory point of view, physical strength point of view. So we're doing some of that. We did a study in the physical capacity of paramedics in New South Wales and a randomized controlled trial with the introduction of gyms. And we've wrapped that up and just starting to write it up.
So you could have a comparison study, especially with the police,
Yeah.
because often the police roles aren't required to keep up their fitness.
Same as
formally,
paramedics.
whereas
Yeah,
the firefighters are.
that's correct.
So you could do a comparison with police officers.
Yeah.
That's
I now have enough money to buy milk.
Yeah, one of the interesting things for me was that,
Chocolate milk now.
yeah, was that age effect. And you'd think it'd have to be experience
It
equals
is.
resilience,
Mm,
that when you've seen enough cases of it, the uncertainty reduces a little bit because, okay, I've seen this before, I've managed it before, therefore I'm going to be much cooler in
I would agree.
my
you know, to
approach to it.
expect. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm.
No, it's all good. So my field is organisational culture change. Now, I was just wondering, when the workshops were like run and when some of the gyms were started to be rolled out, was there and what kind of resistance? Because, you know, those cultural values of being a paramedic, being tough, being strong, being able to cope with. My sister-in-law is a paramedic here on Gold Coast. And there's no way that she would admit to not being fit enough for the job in a gym. You know, that's all right for those people, but for me, I don't need that. And so I'm specifically looking at culture change for employee wellness or health. So yeah, I was wondering, was there any resistance and what kind?
Yeah, we did an RCT where we put, we went to the region first because they appeared to be the most unhealthy, and we had 3 arms to the trial. There was no gym, and gym and health coach. And we enrolled 150 in total, 150 paramedics. And we got them to, we did physical capacity pre-post, but what was interesting was we did a qualifying, we kind of debriefed them, and they would remark, some, that there was almost bullying in the station with the introduction of if you went to work out, then some other members may make fun of you.
Wow.
Yeah, ostracize you. So there was the opposite. There was paramedics who were true success stories who said this was the impetus I needed. And New South Wales Ambulance said, we're going to give you time on shift to work out as long as you're operationally ready. Unheard of. And he changed his entire lifestyle, cleaned up his diet, and used the gym and lost 40 kilograms and has set sail, at least for the time being, to be more healthy. So that's a positive. Yeah. So right now, what we're proposing, they've come back to us, New South Wales Ambulance, to our team, and said we'd like to study the effect, the long-term effects of these gyms and interventions. So we're at the front end of it, the very front end. We're just forming.
You got time for one more question?
Yeah, I can 2 liters of milk.
One of the things, and it's probably linked to the PhD student that I'm supervising with Rebecca Loud and Jane Gibkins, I'm not sure if she's on. She's looking at emergency nurses, and one of the things she's interested in is shifts and the configuration of shifts, you know, because the shifts can be nuts, and then how they recover between shifts. Yeah. So to me, it's really fascinating to see how long, even with these different levels of fitness, how long some of them take to recover back to their baseline, maybe, of what their heart rate is or whatever.
Heart rate variability.
What helps that recovery? Is it having social support at home? Is it whatever it is? What do they do maybe to increase that recovery? Or and some people probably don't fully recover.
Does she want to do a subset wearing the hexoskins on their off days?
Possibly.
That's what this section's all about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, folks, we are completely on time. What we've done cleverly is looked at a lot of the questions before we even got to the end when you're looking at your watch thinking, I need to get out of here. Okay, so this is the second, this is the end of stop 2, so obviously one more third to go, and this is the pointy end of the sword. It's present tense. So we'll kind of switch. We've talked about everything we need to talk about so far in terms of how I got here and what we've done so far, but now we're to today. So I'm really interested in carrying forward a conversation about how new and emerging technologies. You saw a little bit about how we use the hexoskin as part of my PhD, and since then, in studying the health of first responders, and it may include populations like emergency nurses, for instance. Well, I'll take you through what that might comprise, and I certainly want your input into what we can do. What's useful, I'm now looking at heart rate variability as a measure for a number of reasons that I'll go over in a minute. And how can we combine psychological with physiologic measures to become this full package response to being a first responder? And for me, I continue to harp on health status and its effect on these physiologic responses, probably psychological responses. And I think part of my mantra is we need to understand that effect of health status in either accelerating or attenuating those physiologic responses. How can they be cool? Okay, so I dove into heart rate variability. I came here 2.5 years ago and sat across from Dave Newman. I don't know if he's online or not. And I said, Dave, I'd really like to know about heart rate variability. And he said, well, talk to Paula Bro. So, and off we went, and Surendran Sudanapathy from Exercise Science. I needed to understand what it was because I didn't know. Is there any heart rate variability experts in this room? Perfect, I'm going to continue. So we are looking at interbeat variability, and you can see that pointed, these are measured in milliseconds, a couple of arrows showing there between interbeat intervals. There's some exciting things happening in heart rate variability measurements that we're going to talk about in a second. But really, it's your heart's ability to be variable in rate is a physiologic response and a response to environmental stimuli. Many. but I'll try and keep it as as simple as I can, because otherwise I get confused. And there will be, I was only kidding about the quiz. There's no quiz. There's a plethora of devices that will purport to tell you your heart rate variability. Garmin, this is the Anya Ring. This is a fingertip SpO2 meter that also does plethysmograph. This is the Hexoskin biometric shirt, which I use, and Paula. And this is the gold standard, which is a Holter monitor. Each one of them, no matter which one you have, needs appropriate cleaning software associated with it to bring out to take out the artifact and to interpolate where needed. Holter has it, and that suite of software has it down. Hexoskin does with the VivoSense, but I cannot comment on the other three at all, other than they'll tell you a number. So, and that's not a bad thing, and I'm sure they're improving. The two on the bottom are based on actual lead 2 tracing, so not on the plethysmograph. Do you know what I mean by that term? It's the waveform of your blood oxygenation. I'm going to show you a picture of one in a second, I think. So actually, whoever wants to wear that shirt will show you your own. So all I'm saying is in 1996, someone wrote a paper for the European Journal of Cardiology and said, if we can figure out how to do good tracings, heart rate variability is going to be the bomb. Although they didn't say that in the paper. That's how I interpreted it. So the technology has caught up, and it's there. It's getting better and better. So that's exciting. Heart rate variability. Here's my primer. We measure it by frequency domain. Heart rates can oscillate. Heartbeats can oscillate like a band on an AM/FM radio, and we divide them into 4. And the ones that we're really looking at is that brown one called high frequency, which represents parasympathetic activity, and the pink beside it called low frequency, which is, although controversial, a mixture between parasympathetic and sympathetic activity. Someone may disagree with me. So really, we want to see, is the heart exerting itself in a parasympathetic way? So that's one way we do it, and that's the area that we're looking at. So now we're getting some really good expression tools. The second is time domain, and the big one that we talk about is root mean square of successive end-to-end or R-to-R intervals. That's a mouthful. All we know is when the number spits out at the end, you can correlate it with that graph. Okay, and the one that excites me the most, imagine me, paramedic, getting excited about this stuff, are nonlinear indices, most particularly Poincaré plots that plot the standard deviation of the R-to-R interval in 2 directions, short and long-term variability. And I'm going to show you exactly what that means. Does anyone wish they had not gone to this seminar?
I'm still wondering when the ninja comes in.
I told you in the bio that I'm not telling you today, but if you invite me back, maybe. The Poincaré plot is a pretty interesting thing, and the software is getting so good at expressing it. When we see on the graph a long torpedo shape like this along the graph, this is actually running on what's called the line of identity. Each one of those little dots is an R-to-R interval plotted, R to the next R to the next R to the next R, the standard deviation of it, I should say. And that represents that kind of slender shape can indicate sympathetic activity. It's juxtaposed by a fan or comet shape over here. Think of it as kind of, I call it chaotic, but it's certainly not long and slender, and that's more of a mixture or a balance between the PNS and the SNS. Okay, and that's about as easily as I can explain it.
So over what period of time is that measurement taken?
In the early days, the 90s, they said, you know, we need at least 5 minutes to do any kind of heart rate variability work. Right. It's dropping, so 90 seconds is acceptable now, up to days. Yeah. So this is what it looks like. Here's a student, and the graph on the far left is a student sitting very quietly in a room. We took the phone away from him and said, you're going to see in 15 minutes. Okay, just think good thoughts. So you see wide variability, which may be indicative of a higher degree of parasympathetic activity, although it's lots of influence. The next day we took him down the hall and we said, there's 4 doors. Behind each door is something that's going to scare you. It's a critically ill person, and you have to resuscitate them. And you have to do the skill perfectly, okay? And then we let him reset for 2 minutes. There's another door, another door, another door. So as you can see, his response over a 40-minute period was long and slender, like a torpedo. To us, was indicative of a higher level of sympathetic nervous activity. 2 days later, we took him back to the same room, or her, and said, same 4 skills, you know what they are, started the watch. So you see, and by the way, the axes aren't aligned, by the way, just so you know. But it gives you an indication that there is either a learning effect or an effect of better control of kind of that visceral response. And by the way, this is station 3. Right? That is a mannequin. Okay, so I had this life cast baby out of England, and I borrowed one, and they came around the corner, and you had to resuscitate it.
Oh God.
Yeah, and it is the most lifelike mannequin I have ever seen in my life. That little baby is 10 grand, by the way. So we're starting to incorporate heart rate variability and measures like that into some of our research. So, you know, a final comment is it's really hard to understand to explain heart rate variability. There's everything from pathophysiologic processes to hydration status to electrolyte balance to caffeine to Red Bull to everything that affects heart rate variability. We're trying to parse some of that out and say generally we may be able to see trends in the opposition or the balance between the two nervous systems, SNS and PNS. Okay, but in the end, if we can do this and kind of look at level of system activation, how can we now measure it by self-report or observation? And that's really where we're at. Really good systematic review by our friends at the Tactical Research Unit in Bond University, who state that for tactical personnel, tactical paramedics and others, operationally and in training, heart rate variability measurement may be key in promoting their health, safety, and operational effectiveness. So this is kind of the first really nice systematic review of heart rate variability in tactical populations. So a good read. So it gives me hope. So that brings us to kind of some of the technologies I'd like to offer up. The biometric shirts, of which we maintain an inventory of about 40. We do all those things with heart and respiratory rate, steps and cadence, energy burn, accelerometry. It will give you your VO2 max over time and a measure of health status. It does really nice sleep studies. Hexoskin has published a white paper on it on their website. If you want to see exactly, obviously the gold standard is EEG, but it will give you good REM, non-REM breakdowns. Hexoskin has been featured in over 100 published studies. I actually did one of the first validation studies on the Hexoskin in 2015 to make sure that it would work. We've upped the game, Paula and I, and we brought on board the Astroskin, which is the next level up. You can see, actually, you can see the numbers moving on the right-hand side of your screen. The Astroskin, which is in the room here today, does 3 more measures, including continuous systolic blood pressure, continuous blood oxygenation levels, SpO2, and continuous skin surface temperature, as well as all the others. And you can see what's happening here. This is actually a readout of a student doing box breathing. So you'll see their heart rate vary, you'll see the respiratory rate vary, and you'll see their blood pressure vary.
What's box breathing?
Box breathing is squared breathing, so it's a mindfulness exercise where you would do a 4-second inhale, 4-second hold, 4-second exhale, 4-second hold.
Kind of relaxing.
With a mindfulness piece, but really it's inducing vagal tone. That's what you're trying to do. So the Astroskin currently is used on the International Space Station. There's only 7 of the Astroskins in Australia, and they're all at Griffith University. So 2 of them are here. So right now, in fact, this past week, the first published article on astronaut physical activity using the Astroskin has been published, and I am currently doing a reliability and validation study on the Astroskin as we speak. I think
So
that's important.
so what's the headband measuring?
SpO2 and blood pressure.
Right.
And blood pressure is based on pulse transit time. And they've got a proprietary algorithm, Hexoskin does, that combines some physiologic variables to derive a number called this is your blood pressure. And I have to say, anecdotally, it's looking pretty good. So we are so on time. This is so good. Here's the challenge. I'm going to leave you with 3 distinct challenges. Can we explore provider health and wellness in situ? Because I'm really interested in the workplace, like where you do work. How might any of what you've learned today influence your own research is the second question. And the third is, what suggestions would you have for me as an early career researcher? Because I think I've got the physiologic side kind of going okay.
Yeah.
But I need the other side. I'm doing some research along with Paula, where we're using things like the Stay 6 in our undergraduate paramedic students in placement, virtual placement, things like that. But I think I need some more. We talked about this. Yeah.
We put some bids in, so we're waiting to see.
And then we can spread the net wider. So for me, that concludes my presentation. This is the end of stop 3, I would encourage discussion, and the discussion has been really good this morning. What are some of your thoughts to any of that, Earl?
Thank you. That was wonderful.